Hello, BookTube. It's Sunday, and I'm here to answer my Q&A for 500 subscribers. I've got a number of questions here. We'll see how we go along. I might need to split this up into two videos, but we'll see how it goes. First, I'm going to read it off my phone. And the first question that I have here is from Mark Richardson of Richardson Reads. He says, congratulations. Thank you, Mark. And I have to ask you about your personal history with SF Digest magazines. Well, that goes back quite a ways. I suppose I probably first learned about them sometime around the mid 70s by buying uh, paperback collections, something like Orbit or, Year's Best SF, things like that, and then seeing them listed in the back of the locate, or in front, I guess it probably would have been such and such story was from Analog, Galaxy, you name it, whatever it was from. And where I was living then, which was sort of a rural community area up in northern Ontario, I don't remember ever actually seeing an actual magazine, but I was aware of them and curious about them. And I don't think it was until the early 80s, very early 80s, 1980s, when I went to Toronto, a larger city, and with a lot of bookshops and magazine stalls that I could buy these things. So I started buying Analog magazine of science fiction and fantasy, uh, Isaac Asimov's science fiction. And because I liked Isaac Asimov so much, I started subscribing actually to quite early on Isaac Asimov's science fiction. And they used to come, which I didn't really care for it at the time. They would come just as they are, but with your address label sort of pasted across the front cover, either on the bottom, like it, on the bottom. There's too much glare there. Like on the bottom, like that, or on the front edge of the cover. So I blotted out part of the cover. But I don't know. I can't remember how many years I did subscribe to it, but I kept them all, and I also bought many when I saw them in used bookshops, charity shops, you name it. And by the time I went to university in the late 80s, I probably at that point accumulated several hundred, I suppose. Um, yeah, it must have been, I must have had several hundred of them. But then where I moved, I moved to Kitchener-Waterloo in Ontario, Southern Ontario, to go to university at Wilfrid Laurier University. And I lived in Kitchener, and it was a dual, it's a dual sort of cities. And there was a comic book shop there that sold science fiction books and everything. It started out, I think, probably in the 50s or 60s, selling some comics and science fiction, um, and moved more, I think, into comic books by the time I arrived on the scene. But he had a lot of old digests and even older pulps, a few of them still. And I was ecstatic, and I started buying a lot of them, more and more, reading them, buying them from other places, because at that point they were very cheap. Like, these things were, like, if I paid 10 cents for them, I was paying a lot of money. In other words, but this comic book place, he wanted to clear them out, like what was on the shelves. So I think I got, like, they were like a penny a piece basically. So I bought what he had. There must have been 150, 200, mostly analogs on there. But he also had Galaxy science fiction. Um, and that came out in the 51-ish, I think, 1950 or 51. So he had pretty well most of the run of the 50s. So I got those for not much more than, 10, 20 cents each because they were older, so I paid a little more. And then he asked me if I was interested in any more. And he took me into the back room, and he had about 6 or 8 boxes or more. I can't remember now. It was just, full of these things. Like, obviously, there were duplicates, so they were mixed up. There were everything. So basically, I think for like $5, I was able to carry these away. And I think in total, I wound up with like a couple thousand of these, but many of them were duplicates. So I spent a long time going through, putting them on the shelf in order. And I wound up with analog, I think, pretty well from when it started in its digest size. Trying to stretch my memory here. Well, it used to be astounding science fiction anyway. Uh, it must have been sometime in the late 40s, I think, that it changed its name and went to digest size. And I had most of those. Like I had, like with that collection, I had, it was spotty, but I probably had most of it up to like, the 70s. Missing maybe, 60, 70 of them. And I was able to complete, like I had very, very complete of Isaac Asimov. That started in the late 70s, I believe, memory serves. And there were more galaxies. So I had actually a complete run. By the time I was done, I had a absolutely complete run of Galaxy. Can't remember when it actually disappeared, but I'm quite sure I had every single one and multiples of some. And I also had other ones from the 40s. There was like Planet Stories. These are more of the pulps. They were larger size. There was Amazing Science Fiction. That actually, it went to I had it. It was digest size at some point, and I had several hundreds of those. But I also had the larger format ones, and then I think they went back to the larger format at some point. Um, I don't know if they're still running, but also Magazine of Science Fiction and Fantasy. I wasn't so much for the fantasy, but Isaac Asimov wrote a little article. I don't know if it was an editorial from it. No, I think it was a science little bit that he wrote. He wrote an editorial in the Isaac Asimov science fiction every month. But yeah, so I think by sort of mid 1990s, early 1990s, I must have had 4,000 of these things, and I had duplicates as well because I had, like I say, a complete run of analog pretty well from its inception as analog. And then I started buying, specific ones from the 30s and 40s. Mainly, I was buying ones that had Clifford Simak stories in, but they're the pulps, not so much the digest. So yeah, and I never got around to reading every one, but I went through every single one and read authors that I liked. First of all, so I expanded all those. I got rid of all those fairly quickly. Then I would at any point I would just pull one off, and an author that I wasn't that familiar with, I would read. And it was interesting. And I also had the all these compilations, collections of science fiction stories as well. And it was, I think I got to a point where I probably had a few hundred of those various formats. There was like New Directions, all sorts of things like this, Orbit, Years Best SF, you name it. there were many of these, and just normal collections as well. And I think I got to a point where I had, anytime I picked up one of these collections, I had the original magazine stories. And the great thing I liked about the magazine stories was that there was differences in many times for the published book. I remember I having Dune, and I think all the Dunes were serialized, if I remember right. And Dune was, I'm sure, was done in analog, if I remember. But I'm not sure if there was that much difference in those. I know there were differences with the Clifford Simak ones, and I was more interested in that. But no, yes, I'm just looking at the time here. I did 10 minutes on one question, so yes, I will be doing 2 videos by the sounds of it. But yeah, that's more or less my history. And then when I came to the UK, like this is now 15 years ago, but prior to that, I had put them in storage, and then just they got dispersed. A lot of them recycled too, which is sad. The idea was, like, I kept all the duplicates anytime I bought a whole bunch of them, because I was selling books as well, but I was selling archaeology, and I still had the thought of trying to maybe sell these, but at that point, these were not very sought after. That's the thing, but they are now. It's changed. It's like records. I used to have a huge record collection too that I'd given away, and it's amazing how things change, and some things are worth their weight in gold almost now. But anyway, let's move on. The next question is from Lou Bookworm. Now this is getting sort of a little more personal here. Could you tell us more about Dark Passages, Moments of Transition? Thank you for your videos. Well, thank you, Lou Bookworm, for watching. Now, Dark Passages, Moments of Transition is a collection of my own poetry. It was published just over 2 years ago now. It's published by Siren's Call Publications. They're a small publisher in the United States. They predominantly do horror and dark fiction. So my collection of poetry is not so much horror fiction or horror poetry. It's dark poetry. And it's not, as Steve Donahue would say, a slim volume of poetry. This goes to over 250 pages. A bit. Well, there's blank pages in it. So, but anyway, it's over 250 pages long. So it's a collection of poetry that I'd written since I was in the UK here, over probably about a 6-7 year period. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger. I was envisioning, first of all, a slim volume or a booklet of poetry. But they seemed to like what I had, and I had more, so I gave them more, and it came out September. I think it was September, a couple years back. But yeah, it's a print on demand. You can get it in paperback and in ebook. It's on Amazon. It's on Kobo. So yeah, go out and buy 20 copies each. But yeah, it's my poetry book. It's as I say, it's by a publisher, but a small publisher in the United States. Then next question is by A.W. Shubar. What explains your interest in Africa, and specifically South Africa, and all the books about them? Well, I think it goes back to originally when I was young. It must have been in the 70s, looking in the library for things on history, and coming across a book about explorers, and seeing David Livingstone and other African explorers, and got interested that way. And I think early on I read a biography of David Livingstone by Elspeth Huxley. And then later I got Tim Jeal's biography. I guess that would have been nearly about 1980 or 81. I still got the same copy, and I actually got him to sign it a number of years ago at the Oxford Literary Festival, so that was really nice. Yeah, and I think, yeah, and it just sort of expanded from there. Me buying, mostly it was David Livingstone for exploration. I remember going into Britnell's, which was a new bookstore in Toronto and Yonge, just north of Bloor. Had been there for 100 and some years. I sadly say it's they'd shut up shop. Probably it must be close to 20 years ago now. But I went in there and I found out that his last journals were still available, and I think it was Greenwood Press. So I think it cost me. I think the price was about 50 US or something like that. So it was a bit pricey. And we're talking, yeah, early 80s here. So, but I was working, so I spent money on books and records. And there was just, yeah, I just started getting interested in Africa, and I picked up, I think in library or at a bookshop, a book about South Africa, and just, yeah, started getting very interested in the history. And I continued to read, and I found James Michener's The Covenant, which is basically his novel about South Africa. And I think that one of the things that really, really clinched it for me was by the time mid 80s come around, and it actually sort of clinched it for me buying books in general, but there was a fabulous documentary called Africa that was made by Basil Davidson, an African historian. And that just opened my eyes to so much about African history that I never knew at the time. And well, not nobody knew, but it wasn't popularized because Africa was not taught. Like a history of Africa wasn't taught anywhere. You didn't read it in any books about world history. I think it's completely absence from like multi-volume. Like if I remember right, the Will and Ariel Durant series. I don't think there's really anything. There might be some North African stuff in there, the Sahara and in Egypt, obviously. Because I used to have a set. I read it through, and then I reread a few times. I think the ancient history volumes, the Greek Roman volumes. But yeah, it was just totally absent, and that made me more interested. Well, why isn't there, you know, um, more information in general reading for Africa and specifically South Africa? But yeah, that's basically where how I got interested in it, and I've always been, and it's been re-sparked now by getting all the Zulu books that I got a couple months ago. So, and I'm glad I'm back into it, and I haven't read too much since I've been here in the UK. So we're talking 15 years. The amount of new information that's been found in archaeology is just amazing. So, anyway, next question. Bill Rutenberg of the Rutenberg Library asked, did you have any food you really liked when you did all of your travels while doing archaeology? He'd actually asked me this on another video, but I thought it was too good to pass up for this, so I asked him to put it on here. And yes, there was. Well, when I went to Jordan '91, um, uh, our sort of breakfast or a second breakfast, like you had a bit of something in the morning, getting up at like 5 a.m. But our second breakfast must have been around 8, 9 o'clock, and it was usually falafels, and I loved falafels. Um, and hummus. I just loved hummus, and I love the food in the Middle East. I really really love the food, uh, and the one thing, like, there was mangoes everywhere. This is sort of interesting. Like, I ate tons of mangoes, mangoes itself, mango juice, you name it. But for some reason, when I came back, six 7 months later, I guess, must have been, yeah. Um, I couldn't stand mangoes. It took me well over a decade before I could eat another mango or mango juice. Um, but yeah, so it was, and the place that I stayed in Jordan was, it was an American Center of Oriental Research, so it was a research center. And they had a Jordanian cook, but they cooked mostly American food. But uh, he sort of found out my some of my favorites was like scalloped potatoes, and I like meatloaf and roast beef and things like that. So he would specifically make some of that for me, but also they would do traditional Jordanian food. But I would say hummus and falafels was the biggest thing that I really really they were new to me, and become lifelong favorites. Um, there was hummus with bits of lamb or beef in it, but mostly lamb, which is fantastic. And the watermelons in Jordan. Oh, I love watermelon, and these were just so big and so juicy that well, again, the cook would always have extra watermelons for me when I was staying there. And I would just sometimes I would just cut one in half and then just take it and take a spoon and just sit there and eat it. It's mostly water, but this was so sweet, so juicy. Just loved watermelon. So yeah, so that's the kind of food that I had. And when I went to Egypt, it was similar. Occasionally, I went into a restaurant and um, all they had was sort of Americanized foods or North American foods. So I reverted to that rather than looking somewhere else. But usually I would try to get Arabic food, and we went to a yeah. I just remembered that we went to a Greek restaurant in Jordan one time, and that was really good. The Greek food. How are we doing? We're 22 minutes. Yeah, so we'll go 30 minutes for this, and then we'll move on. Finbar Tinderhaven asks, why, to what extent, and how accurately does the term atheist describe your current assessment of reality? And then the next part is, do you have any spiritual or historical TBRs, etc.? Thanks, and I appreciate your videos. Well, thank you. Uh, I am an atheist. I do not believe in any God, not spiritual in any way either. Uh, I, I, my pat answer for most of the time is that I knew too much about religion. That was sort of I guess in some ways it's a sarcastic remark, but I am interested in religions, and I took years of biblical Hebrew. So I was able to read the Old Testament. I studied mostly the Old Testament and not too much the New Testament. And something came up recently that just made me realize, yeah, I don't know the New Testament probably as well as I should. I've read it, and I've studied some of the periods, but I don't know it as well as the Old Testament. But I am interested in religions, all religions, always have been. Before I even did archaeology, went to university for archaeology, I was interested in religions, and the early sort of even early Christianity I was interested in the offshoots that there were the Gnostics and Coptic, and yeah, the Coptic is very interesting in Africa. But for TBRs. Spiritual, I don't really have anything spiritual, but I haven't read too much religion recently. And recently, I mean in the last decade or so. I would like to get Dermot. What's his name? There's Dermot McCullough, I think it is it. But anyway, there's a few years ago a massive, just memory is gone again. A massive history of Christianity that he did, and he was at one of the um, um, literary festivals in Oxford, and I just ran out of money and I couldn't get the book, so I just never bothered with it. But I don't have anything else on my TBR to that extent. Let's see here where we are here. We're 25. Okay, so yeah, let's do one more. William Fett. Hi, Sean. I have watched many of your videos and enjoyed them very much. What do you think of H.G. Wells' Jules Verne? What works of them stand out in your opinion, if any? I do like H.G. Wells and I do like Jules Verne. Not it's for H.G. Wells. I do like the Time Machine, Invisible Man. Like I like all the science fiction ones, Things to Come. But I also like his other ones, like History of Mr. Polly, um, and just yeah. There's a number of other ones. I'm struggling with trying to remember names at the moment. But the non science fiction ones that I enjoyed, I always found he's a little. It takes a while to get used to his writing style. He's um, other writers of the time. I don't have problems. I don't have a problem with him, but there's just some writers that you just have to spend a little more time with, and as well worth it. And H.G. Wells is. I've picked up a set here of probably half of his fiction. I just haven't got back into it, but I got it so cheap that I thought, yeah, I'll pick it up and hopefully I will get to it again. Jules Verne, I have not read enough of him for sure. Uh, Definitely, there's what is it? Journey. Well, it's I'm trying to remember the. I think the book is called Journey to the Center of the Earth. Um, and 12 Weeks in a Balloon, the Mysterious Island, like all those, like the more popular ones, the ones that they made the films of, I've read 20,000 Leagues Beneath the Sea and so forth, that I've enjoyed those, but I have not read all his books, and I would like to read more, and I've enjoyed all of them. And they're, his as with um, H.G. Wells really fit well for the term. Like I mentioned about SF and there's sci-fi, um, and there's speculative fiction, but there's also scientific romances, and they fit perfectly into that term. If you wanted to subdivide. So yeah, so I'll end it there, and I'll come back with part two. Thank you, BookTube.